Hello, everybody. I am super excited. We have a very special guest, a friend of mine, a leader of our industry, and I'm so excited he made some time to chat with us. He recently wrote a book. This is the book we're going to be talking about today. We got tons of stuff we talk about. I read this book and I was so excited. I've been dying to talk to somebody about it, and I thought, who better to talk about it than Bryan Orr himself? Bryan, hey, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is fun.
So, this book, how did you get so much stuff into one little book? I mean, it's every time I look at this, I think there's so much information. I made so many highlights. I don't think I've made that many highlights in a non-technical book before.
Well, I have to start by saying you're very kind, and it's much appreciated. You were very kind with my wife's book as well, and we both definitely appreciate it. Yeah, this book is it wasn't actually the first one I was planning to publish. I have two other ones that I've been writing on for longer, actually, and this is one that for a couple reasons I decided now was the time for it. It's a conversation that I've been having a lot, both within the trades, but also you'll notice pretty quickly there's a lot in here about the trades, but it's not just about the trades. It's a lot of it comes from my experience as a parent. That's probably one of the defining things about my life is being a parent of so many kids, and the responsibilities and the different things that we've worked through. My own experiences as a kid, and really, I think a lot of people probably read this book. At least I imagine they do, and are like, "Man, this is a lot of different topics, kind of jammed into one thing." But it's what I really felt like needed to be said right now. And a lot of it also has to do just with my grandpa. Like, I mean, for those of you who have read the book, or maybe even just read the first couple chapters, my grandpa, kind of weighs heavily in this book, and I've been thinking a lot about him. He's starting to decline a little bit in his health, and I just thought, I really need to make sure that I honor him while he's still with us, and so that helped me kind of prioritize this and say this is the book that I want to put out now, because it also is just generally it's just generally honoring of not only his life, but many people like him who have invested in the lives of others in a substantive way, not necessarily in a traditional education way, but all the people who have invested in my life, but so many people who are in the trades and in other professions where people have invested in them.
After reading this, or even during the reading, I kept thinking, I hope I get to shake this guy's hand, your grandfather's hand. I hope I get to shake his hand. Just what an inspiration. I thought it
Yeah.
was fantastic. You talk about how he took everyday life and made it into a school and learning experiences. And I remember I was traveling through Laos, and there was a couple. We're sitting on the back of rice in this trailer, and as they're going through with their kids, they're having everything was a class. They were talking about converting kilometers into miles and the geography and the food that they were eating, and then they were going and playing with the kids, like all the math, everything was there, and I was just fascinated by that. And then now I've got to meet you and know you over the years of how
Yeah.
you grew up with that same type of educational mindset. Absolutely awesome.
Yeah, and if you ask my grandpa, in fact, after he read it, actually, my grandma read it to him, because reading isn't something that's ever come easy to him because of his dyslexia. And so she read it to him, and he came over. They come over every time the kids have a birthday, and we just hang out for usually an hour or two. And he said, "Man, I just had no idea how much of an impact I had." And it's like, yeah, Papa, that's true with me, but it's also true with all the grandkids, because he never thought of it that way. He never went out trying to be something special. He never went out to gather accolades. And even when he thought about, I think, raising his own kids, and then us, really kind of having a big hand in raising us, he was just doing life, right? He was just sharing who he was. Sharing his joy, sharing his passion, sharing his interests, and giving us a chance to experience that. And that was the seed that got planted in all of us, rather than because some people it comes more naturally too. I think you and I are a little bit maybe more natural educators, where we try to like, all right, this is really exciting, let's dive into this. Let's break this down for the students. My grandpa wasn't necessarily doing that on purpose. It just was an extension of who he was, and everybody sort of got to benefit from that. And I think for him, it was largely unknowing. And I think that's true of a lot of people who have worked in the trades their whole lives and invested in a lot of people. They maybe don't know the impact that they've had. And part of the message that maybe is hidden in this book is remember to thank those people. Remember to thank the ones that don't have podcasts and aren't on social media. And, hey, I appreciate it when people say nice things to me, but for every one of us out there, there are thousands who have made those micro investments of just being good people and serving the folks who are nearby them, whether it's kids or other adults, people they've mentored, people they've apprenticed, all that.
There's so many topics in here, but you talk about education, and I was not a natural educator. I just started wanting to give back and figure out how can I explain this differently, because traditional school wasn't my thing. Like, I struggled so hard through school because I didn't know all these things, like autodidact. The ADHD wasn't a thing. It was just, you have an intention, we're going to whip it out of you. So there are so many things in here, I think, as an educator, and whether you're a formal educator, a trades educator, or somebody that's training apprentices, a parent. I mean, there was so much in here about education, and there were so many things I wish I would have had this information when I started teaching, because it would have, these things I had to learn the hard way, and you have it lined out in here so simple.
Well, I mean, I'm the same way, right? I mean, I didn't take a college course on education. You just do it. And so I don't think you and I are unsimilar in that way of how we came to it. But once you are doing it, you realize the value. You see how important it is to care about sharing. And that really is all it is. Education is just fundamentally sharing the joy that's within us, right? The joy to learn something new, to apply something, the joy of discovery. That's actually, I'm pretty unashamed about my faith. And that's actually a scripture that says, be prepared to share the joy that's within you. And I think that's more than just in spiritual things. It's like everything. When you find something where there's joy, spread that to somebody else. They may or may not be interested in it, but you never bump into a joyful person who it's like, man, that was a bummer, like that sucked. It's a positive impact on people. Some of my kids are at the stage now where, they like to joke around and call me a nerd, and but I can see it sort of winking, right? Like everybody wants to have that in their parents, where they're excited about something, they care about things, and not just necessarily even one thing, but just a lot. There's just, as things come around, you get excited, you get into it, and yeah, maybe it is nerdy sometimes, maybe it is a little cheesy. When kids are teenagers, they're not necessarily into cheesy, but we all come back to it with the dad jokes and everything else. So
I have no dad jokes at all. I mean, none,
you're
right?
dad jokeless. Yeah. I've definitely told the, and I don't tell it right, but the moth joke is epic. We're definitely not going to do that here, I wouldn't imagine. But if you ever see Ty, ask Ty for the moth joke. It's incredible.
Yeah, Perla, she almost walked off when I was talking to my friends in Idaho. She's like, nope.
Not doing it. Yeah.
I love it when you started this book off. I mean, there's so many great things, but you put a quote in here from Aristotle, and it said, hard work, dedication to one's craft, and the mastery of skills are the foundation upon which societies are built and sustained. Aristotle. And I'd never heard that before. And I just got chills from that, because that is so true and so long ago, and it still applies today. I mean, during the pandemic, we got to see how important that really was. And for us to take, for tradespeople, a lot of times we don't get the respect that we deserve. And a lot of times we treat that to other people. I mean, when I started to trade, it was not like this fun, hey, we're going to have fun learning HVAC. It was pretty tough. And I think we just take that, how people disrespect us, and we also turn that to other people. But at the same time, I think sometimes we don't have the respect ourselves. Like, when you read that and you think how important the job is we're doing, that comes from inside. When you realize that, hey, as a tradesperson, whether you're an electrician or HVAC or plumber, any of these, you have an important job. Have that pride, and to build those skills, keep learning. Just because Bob told you something was true, 20 years ago, doesn't mean it was true then or still applies now. And I just thought, man, that was a really powerful. And I'm so glad. That was just a great way to start that off, just without that quote from Aristotle.
Yeah. What's really interesting is these things are not new. There's nothing new under the sun. And Kimberly Llewellyn, who has a lot of contribution in this book and is a good friend, we've talked about this topic a lot. Respect for the skilled worker, respect for the application as much as the theory. Respect for those who do as much, if not even maybe more in a lot of cases, than those who just think. This topic was really big with the Greeks and the Romans, like, and so she quotes Vitruvius a lot, and Vitruvius was like the father of modern architecture. And we say modern, I mean, this was very ancient, but his thinking drives a lot of thinking today. In fact, it's one of the required books in architecture school, or is kind of his books of architecture. Oh. And he really starts it off, I mean, like right off the bat, by saying that we always have to recognize application is the goal, right? All the thoughts and the designs and the theory, those are all just a shadow of the thing in itself. And that's the concept of Plato's cave, right? This idea, and again, another Greek philosopher, this idea of if you're in a cave and all you see your whole life, there's a light source behind you, and all you see is the shadows of what's appearing on the wall, and you begin to believe that those shadows represent reality. Then you really are believing not necessarily a lie, but you're not really understanding the thing in itself. And our goal needs to be to as much as possible embrace the application and those who live in the application, even in its imperfection. It's an area of frustration that I get a lot, and I get frustrated with myself, because sometimes when we get in our ivory towers, we really do begin to forget what it was like, what it's like to actually have to do this stuff. And you can get so idealistic, you can get so into the design and all that, and that's great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with thinking and thinkers and designs and all that, but it has to be in service of the actual doing. When I was a young teenager, I really got into Greek philosophy and Greek history. It was just this little period of time when I got super into that. And you really start to realize everything that we're facing today was pondered by these people, and the conclusions that they often come to. If you think of like the Stoics, for example, like Seneca, what we come to is that it really is just embracing life. It's embracing the application. It's in the doing and not in the complaining and in the constant pondering and thinking and whining and fussing and fighting and all the stuff that we face in society, right? It's just like, do something with your hands, actually apply something, take what you've learned and do something with it, or teach somebody else. And that really is fundamental to that book, which is why I started with that quote. I always go off on these little tangents, but that's why I started with that quote, because it's so fundamental to the ideas that I'm wanting to apply. And again, like, this is the thing. I was talking to my residential service manager yesterday, because he had just finished reading the book and he had some takeaways. And I said, hey, Dre, just to be clear, if you believe that I wrote this because I've mastered it, you misunderstand. You misunderstand. I write out of my own struggle, and this struggle is ongoing, of being in a headspace where you just embrace the joy of doing and living and existing, and not passing judgment on everything that's happening all the time, but rather just operating within it and experiencing the joy in it. And so it's still a struggle. It's always a challenge, but for us to fundamentally value that doing as the thing in itself, that is the goal, is the doing. And we get to do that. And isn't that awesome, right? We get to actually do things that impact our world. And that's what makes it amazing.
It absolutely is. It's funny you said that, because I've been running ductwork and service calls and everything, remembering some of these things that, man, I thought that, I don't remember attics being this hot. Like, I remember them being hot, but not this hot. But we were doing some ductwork, and, I'm still learning manual D, still understanding, still taking classes from Ed and all these great people. And I'm looking at the ductwork and I'm evaluating all the things that's wrong that needs to be done. And Perla says, hey, it's not your job. Are we going to get started, or are you going to evaluate everything all day? And I'm like, nope, let's just get started. It's not my job. Let's go ahead. Let's get in, get the job done. And then we had a great time. But at first, just that mindset of, hey, you gonna think about it all day? We're just gonna do something. And I was like, oh, I love you so much. And then me and her was get in and started getting it done. But that's so true.
Yeah. I always the weirdest. It's not the weirdest, but one of the weirder stories that I tell that I actually get emotional about every time, so I'll try not to, is a couple of years back. Leilani and I were in IKEA, and I do not recommend doing this as a date. IKEA is that place is the devil. I'm just going to be real honest. It's all this stuff, and then you have to go back and assemble it. It's terrible, and they make it. It's like a labyrinth. They make you go only one way, and you can't back out. It's just horrible. But anyway, so we're going through IKEA, And it's a little bit of a tangent, but it speaks to kind of what you're saying. We go to IKEA and they have these tiny houses, right? So there's this tiny little build out. And at the time, I think we had 9 or maybe just had 10 kids a couple of years back. So probably already had 10. And I was like, you know what? I said, it was one of these little tiny spaces. I'm like, we could live in this. We lived in a trailer. We could go back and we could live in this. And she just looks at me. She's like, that sounds amazing. Like that sounds awesome. I'm like, I agree. And it's like, of course we're not going to do that because it isn't practical if we were forced into it. But man, like every time I think about that, I get so emotional because it is like, that's what life's about. Like sometimes we have to just remember that it is not about creating comfort for ourselves. Like that's not where we're the happiest. And yes, comfort is good at times and recreation is good at times and relaxing is great. Those are all great things, but that's not the goal. It's all just this ebb and flow. And one of the fundamental things that gives us joy in life is in embracing a challenge. And sometimes life has to force it on us for us to be willing to do it. But I think it's even better if we can do it on our own and say, let's do it again. Let's go back in the field. Let's run some ductwork. Let's dive in to this stuff and actually do something with our hands. We're building a pool right now, and boy, let me tell you, that's a version of that. Not that I'm having to do as much of the labor as I have on prior projects, but it's good to have challenges that we face.
It is. It's amazing how in everything that we do, things that we can learn, like building a pool. I imagine I've never built a pool, have no desire to do that, but I imagine you've picked up a lot of things you would have never known before.
Oh yeah,
taking on this project.
Sure,
and
sure.
It's one of the quotes that you have here is learning how to learn is more important than what you learn. I thought that was just great. I mean, that was just awesome because I remember some of the things I just want an answer to get something done.
Yeah.
And then when I realized if I learn how to go and research it and learn how to find these problems, then I can solve not only the issue I'm going for, but I understand that bigger picture. And I thought, wow, that needs to be like one of those quoted things. We're going to quote that. We're going to post that. Bryan Orr. How you learn is more important than
well, easy because the truth is, I'm sure I heard that from somebody else. So I always have to give the caveat. Everything that I ever say or ever write, I'm sure I learned from somebody else. And when I know who it was, then I give them credit. But sometimes I don't know. So it should be like Bryan Orr, but somebody else I'm sure has said it 1,000 times before me. But it's so true, right? I mean, like we say the RTFM thing, right? And of course with HVAC school, because we are a PG-13 platform. It's read the fantastic manual. That's what we want people to do. We want them to go out and find the answers themselves because more than ever now we have access to those answers. And it was so silly, even, I'm sure you experienced the same thing when I first started in the trade, 19, 20 years old, and I would, answer a question or something, but how did you know that? As if I was an oracle of some mysterious knowledge. And it's like, I just read the manual. Like it's just right there. Like it's just right there. And that's an amazing tool that we can give to ourselves, but also to the people who we teach. My instructor, Ron Carey, was very good at that in trade school. He was very good at not giving me the answer, but instead driving me back to the RACT manual or driving me back to the sources of information, which has served me really well.
Oh, and that certainly upsets students when you're trying to lead them to the answer. Just tell me the answer. And I'm like, I'm gonna show you how to find it, which is more important.
Right.
Oh yeah, they get upset, and me too. I remember I was wiring this board and had an issue, and I called this man up. Oh gosh, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was a brilliant guy. And I'm asking him which wire was the common or the blower, some simple thing. And he goes, oh yeah, it's right there. If you look on the back of the door, so I'm looking at the back of the door, he goes, if you see that print right there, and I'm like, yeah. And he goes, if you follow that, you're going to find it. And I'm like, it's 6:00. I still got 4 more calls to do. Can you just tell me? He goes, I could, but it's not going to help you. And I'm like, yeah, it's going to definitely. And I was so mad. I had to walk outside and I was just so angry. Yeah. And I will never forget that because that forced me to read that schematic, which I was so intimidated by. And then I found the answer. And then from then on, like it really changed my whole trajectory right there. And he was, at the time, I felt like he was being such a jerk, but really he was teaching me the most important lesson he could possibly teach me, and I will never forget that.
Yeah, I've had that so many times. I think of and there's a lot of examples of this, but that's an example of driving somebody back to source. Another one is people who push you to excellence, push you to do better. I think of Kelly Klotz. He was a guy who was one of the two guys who interviewed me for my first job. And I was, it's right before my first son was born. I decided I wanted to go into trims for a while. I'm not sure why, rather than service. I wanted to do trim work. And so I was working by myself. I drugged this 5-ton furnace and condenser through the sand in order to install it myself and set the equipment. And it was, I was never great at install as it was. And so I just decided that when I was piping in the furnace, rather than actually making nice bends, I would just kind of take the curve, and when I bent the pipe on the ground, bent the tubing on the ground, it kind of already had that curve. So I just kind of took the curve of the suction line and ran that into the furnace, or ran it into the case coil. And Kelly comes out, stops by. He's like, "Hey, I just want to check on you, see how you're doing." And he comes in and he says, "That looks bad." I'm like, come on, it's fine. It's residential new construction. Nobody cares. I was kind of being loose with it. He's like, "Nope, that looks bad and you're going to need to redo it." I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" He's like, "Yep, you're going to need to redo it." And he just hops back in his truck, nice smile on his face, just hops back in his truck. "Just make sure you redo it." And he leaves. And I was so ticked off. But the whole time I knew he was right. The whole time I knew it just wasn't good enough. And nobody loves to hear that. But those are the people who really care about you. They're the ones who are hard on you, but they're hard on you with kindness. It's not like they're not being a jerk, but they are, but they're pointing you to be better, to be that version of yourself that you really can be. And that's a lot what this book is too, because my grandpa certainly was that guy. I mean, he was not easy, even on 6, 7, 8-year-old me. I mean, when I would sort the bolts and screws wrong, he would make me redo it. He'd, "Oh, no, this is wrong," and then he'd mix them all up, and he was that way. But it's really good. It's good for people to experience that.
Absolutely. And that's another thing you talked about. You decided you want to do something else, is going wide before you go narrow. And, I was thinking back and I was like, I did that. I never thought about it. My dad did sheet metal and duct work and everything, but, I did farming and ranching and automotive and heavy equipment operator. Like, I had all these great things I wanted to be. And then once I got into air conditioning, I was like, this is what I want to do. But then even in that, I was thinking, man, you know what? I want to go work with the Boilermakers. And I did that for a day and realized, nope, that's not what I want to go do. And then I went to work on the chiller side, and I would spend all day with pressure washers up cleaning those cooling towers in the middle of winter. I was like, nope. And then running the rods through, I was like, yeah, no, this isn't what I envisioned it to be. And so trying different things out, I mean, I didn't even realize that was happening to me, but that going wide and trying different things and figuring out what it is that you like, and being good at whatever you're doing, I thought that was really cool, because I was like, what? I did that. I didn't even know I was doing it.
Yeah. And it's a gift we can give the young people in our lives. There's a huge message in the book that's about how we interact with young people, especially our own kids, but really any young people. And I realized that a lot of people gave me that gift. It wasn't just my parents. It wasn't just my grandparents. It was a lot of people who gave me that. And being too impatient with young people about them knowing exactly what they want to do so young, I think is a big mistake. That isn't to say that you don't run into him sometimes, right? The kid who knows he wants to be a doctor and he's a doctor and it works out great. I love that. That's great. That's a great story. I got no problem with that. But that is the exception, not the rule. In the book, I talk about my son, my second son, and how he took a year and he just went all around the country, worked in Yellowstone. He's done carpentry work. He's done everything. I mean, even when he was a kid, his story's like mine, but more extreme. He was working, doing installs, helping me and helping others when he was 14, 15. He did computer programming, Bitcoin mining, and just everything you can imagine. I mean, one night I'm like, man, my internet is going really slow. What is the deal? And so I pull up my router and I see just spiking. And I walk out into the living room, out into the living area, and his laptop's sitting out there. It's a gaming laptop, and the thing sounds like it's overclocked. I mean, it sounds like it's just screaming. And I'm like, Gavin, what are you doing? He's like, I'm Bitcoin mining. I'm like, you're not Bitcoin mining with your laptop on my internet. We're not doing that right now. But that's who he is. But now he's back. He's found the girl that he wants to be with for the rest of his life, and now he's going to be a BAS tech for us for a while. And that who knows how long that'll last. But he'll be good at it while he does it. And it's just such a great thing for people to experience hard work in a wide range of things, because that's where you're not limited, right? Now, once you have all those experiences, now you can figure out where to go narrow, especially later in your career, and become a real industry leading expert. And that's what I want for a lot of young people. And I think as a society, we should be more flexible in giving young people those opportunities.
Absolutely. And it's so great to see him out traveling, because, I truly love that. The perspective that you get when you travel
Hmm.
is so valuable. I mean, getting to see how, other people work and think, and everybody has this little box mindset and they think this is how the world works. And you travel someplace and they have their own individual little box
Right.
mindset. They think that's how the whole world works. But it's so refreshing getting to see all of the, and you get to really see greatness in people. When
Yeah.
you're in the same place, you get to see the grumpy guy every day, or the person that hates their job at the counter every day, or the person at the DMV that, I won't go into there, but you just get to see these things that it's like, oh, but when you travel, you get to see all these different people, and you get to meet people that do these. I'll stop and see somebody doing something, just stop and talk to them. And that's not easy for me because I am naturally an introvert, but just to get to see, hey, what's your story? Like, what are you doing? And they'll tell you about, what is the job they're doing or the life. And they're so excited to get to tell somebody about
Hmm.
what they do, about their passion in life. And I think that's so great. And I've learned to view things so much bigger. I had a friend of mine that does, I don't know what you call it, something with plants. I still don't like plants, like I don't have this like passion for them, but I can appreciate them because of how he talks about them and how he goes into all the depths and stuff. And if I have any plant question, I call him up and he's just like super excited of like, oh yeah, and and it's really cool of how many little things it takes for this whole world to go around.
Yeah, I mean it's incredible, and sometimes I can come across as like super HVAC centric, and I am, but but I think some people misunderstand. Like I get excited about a lot of stuff, and that's just in my nature to do that. And if I at 16 had decided to get into electronics or be an auto mechanic, I would be just as excited about those things as I am about HVAC. Now, having experienced HVAC, and like it's a perfect fit for me, so it's great, and I love it. But I also don't think everybody should go into HVAC. I'm certainly an evangelist for the trade, and it comes across. My kids always joke around about it. Like when the girls get a new boyfriend or whatever, is somebody who they're interested in, they're like, "Oh, Dad, are you going to try to make him into an HVAC tech?" I'm like, "Probably will, probably will." That way I can keep an eye on him. But like this, I'm fine with that. But Mike Rowe has that quote that says, passion is too fickle to be guided by. But basically the summary is, don't necessarily chase your passion, but take it with you wherever you go. So there's a key distinction between being a passionate person and bringing that to everything you do and everything you experience versus needing to know what your passion is. And that's something that kids get so confused, I think. And not just kids, it's a lot of people. They'll be like, well, I don't know what I'm passionate about. It's like, well, what have you done? If you've done a lot of things, then you're going to have a much better chance to know, hey, Boilermaker's not for me. Maybe that part isn't for me, but this other thing is definitely something I enjoy. And then you can start to dive down those various rabbit holes. I just love to see that. I love seeing people get passionate about wherever they are.
Absolutely. And it's so great seeing people just excited, whatever it is that they do. It's great. And for me, I think HVAC is the coolest career, right?
Yeah,
Hottest
for sure.
jobs, coolest careers.
Yep. Yep. No doubt.
And so I even drug my wife into the field. Actually, I didn't bring her in. She was working with my dad doing sheet metal, and then now she travels out with me, and we're doing duct work and service calls and stuff like that. And it's pretty cool because one time she'd ask me, well, what's wrong with it? I was like, well, I don't know yet. And she goes, well, why not? I'm like, I have to evaluate it first. I don't know everything. I'm not as smart as you think I am.
Right. It's so funny. It's a really common thing that people will say some version of. It's like, well, you don't know. Well, weren't you trained on it? And they imagine that means that you have like the entire service manual of every piece of equipment and the entire universe in your head and all of the most common failures. And it's like, no, that's not how it works. But it's fun to see somebody when you can finally kind of work alongside of them. I mean, Pearl is great. Leilani's the same way. It's like, they're not nerdy about it necessarily the way we are, but you can definitely see those light bulbs go off as well. Where it's like, oh, okay, yeah, this is pretty cool. So it's fun.
It is absolutely fun. Um, and so another word you used in here was autodidacts. And the first time I heard this word was actually from you a few years ago. And I just had never heard that before, but thinking, man, that fits so well with me. And I was like, I wish somebody would have told me about this in the past.
Yeah, so the first person I ever heard this word from is actually the actress Aisha Tyler. She had a small role in Friends and has been in a bunch of different movies and just done a wide different range of things. And I had a chance to interview her and actually listened to her speak at Podcast Movement back in 2015, I think it was. And I was really taken aback by the way she described it, the way she described herself, which is just this, you're like a crazy person, like you always want to learn things yourself. It's never enough to just have somebody else teach you. Not that you don't learn from other people. And that's, I think, sometimes what people misunderstand. What we're not saying with autodidact is that you don't learn from other people. What we are absolutely saying is that you don't just take one source. You're not just taking a course on it and following that course till you get your certificate and now I'm done and everything is fine. Even if you are taking a course, you're watching YouTube videos and you're reading the book and you're reading ahead and you're getting curious about this and you're looking up a Wikipedia article. And nowadays it's ChatGPT. I'm looking up ChatGPT on everything nowadays to learn more. And that's what autodidacts do, is that it's just a thing that I think it's some of it's genetics, but some of it is experiences that you had at a young age, and you see the benefits. You recognize that you don't have to. Autodidacts recognize that they don't have to be beholden to single sources. They don't have to have a single master who provides them all of the oracles of wisdom. That going out and learning it themselves and following your curiosity, following your interests, is a great way to learn. And in fact, the most noteworthy, most brilliant people in our societies are almost always autodidacts. The ones who whose names travel through history that we know are almost always that way. And that does not mean that they didn't learn from masters. It just means that they didn't stop there.
Yeah, and you sourced that. You gave so many stories of autodidacts in here that I was like, man, I didn't know that. Even going back to the history of how our education system, I've heard like little, snippets of it, but the way that you explained it was just so simply. It's like I've seen these giant articles that were thicker than your book on just, some pieces of that. I'm like, man, this just really summed everything up, and with the information, to back it, like how it came there, why, and how it's relevant. I thought, man, that just really made so much sense.
Yeah, it's Taylor and Dewey, and I don't think Taylor and Dewey were bad guys at all. I think some people, I guess I didn't know them, so maybe they were, but I don't think so. I think they were serving the need of the society at the time, and I think Taylor and the father of Taylorism, that sort of industrialized labor, where you create very fine systems and people basically operate like machines in a factory. At the time, that's what the society was about. I mean, we needed to pump out planes to win a war, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That's good stuff at the time, but it isn't serving the needs of the individual, and it certainly isn't serving the needs of a information society, which is what we've largely become. Now, I think in a lot of ways we probably should go back to an artisan society, and maybe some of that's going to come about too. But in both cases, an artisan society and an information society aren't well served by treating people like cogs in a machine, either on the job side or on the education side. It's going back to looking at people like individuals and treating them as individuals, and that's I think that's super important for us to do. And I think in the trades we actually have a pretty massive opportunity to do that better, because we're not, I have a friend who's an analyst for nuclear power plants. So he came up on nuclear subs, and we were just talking about our different careers. Super, super interesting guy. His name is Bill Nowicki. If you want to look up, he has a podcast called Submarine Sea Stories, and he lives in Georgia, and he's talks about just some of the things he's experienced. But Bill said, he said, it's interesting because obviously if you're trying to prevent a nuclear meltdown from occurring, you can't learn on the job, right? So you have to have it all figured out. It has to be done by a process. It's a series of checklists, and that's how you have to do it that way every time. He said, but what's interesting is that when people begin to become cogs in a machine, and you don't address that understanding of human factors, like actually really understanding what's going on, you find that we're actually riskier than we ever were. So he used the example of 3 Mile Island and how that was really prevented from being an absolute nuclear disaster on the same scale as Chernobyl, and how there was essentially one engineer who just understood what was going on so well and acted in a way that even in post-analysis, they can't understand how he was able to do that. And the answer, of course, is that this guy was very wide. He really understood what he was doing. He wasn't just checking boxes. And that's the challenge that we face. When we treat people like machines, they begin to behave and think like machines. And they can't solve broad problems, and they can't be creative. But in past generations, prior to this sort of industrialization, when people did have to be problem solvers and they didn't have all the answers at their fingertips necessarily, they had to understand more broadly and they had more experiences. And that's what leads to some of these things like 3 Mile Island that could have been terrible that ended up not being. And so it is this tension that we always face that, yes, efficiency is important, but not at the expense of people becoming machines or being treated like machines.
Yeah, and HVAC, there's so much to it. I remember when I thought that I really had HVAC down, and then you unlock another layer, and then you get into, more of the physics, and you're like, man, that is so cool. I didn't realize that was happening. And then you finally like, yeah, I got that down. I really know something. Then you get into like the building science. You realize, man, that's just one piece of the puzzle. Like now we're really our goal is to solve the house issue. And then you're looking at, humidity. It's sometimes I read some of these articles from the building science, and it's just like blows my mind, and I have to kind of go back to level 0, and then I have to go on all these little tangents again to to get back up to where I feel comfortable again. And that's what's so exciting is, it's not just like we just master the trade. I don't think there's a master of the trade. I think there's just an unending just amount of information out here that we can go with. And we have people that specialize in specifics. It's like with manual D, every time I go through manual D, there's something else. Or if I think, okay, I got enough where I can understand it, I go to a class and somebody brings that whole next level to it. It's just, I think that's great. I know it can be overwhelming for a lot of us. You don't try to tackle everything at once, but it's so great to be able to, keep learning and seeing those bigger pictures and how everything comes together. And if you solve one issue, that it can actually cause a bigger problem. And that I'm sure that scientist was able to see that big picture and think, I could just do this, but then we had this other issue. And I think that's awesome.
Right. Yeah. And like you mentioned building science, two of the people who immediately come to mind when you say building science, one is Allison Bales, Dr. Allison Bales. The other is Joe Stiebrick, right? Both of those guys are highly educated guys. So it's really important that people recognize that I am not bashing college in this book. I am not saying college is never useful or never beneficial. But both of those guys, if you know them, those guys are autodidacts. They do things. They love applying the things that they learn. When you talk about Joe Stiebrick and how he learned about the water molecule and different experiments that he did, I mean, they would build up mock buildings in their backyard and try different things on the buildings and all this. And you would think, well, you have a doctorate in this. You should know this. You shouldn't need to do these experiments. It's like, absolutely not. That is how you learn everything, is through trial and error and experimentation and actually fundamentally understanding things and then testing the ideas that you have. That is what science is, right? Is to say, here's my hypothesis. Let's test and see if it actually is true and if it works out in real life. Until you do that application, back to what Kimberly quoted from Vitruvius, until you do that application, you are just chasing the shadow. So absolutely, if you had a good experience in college or you want to pursue the higher education, great. But at the end of the day, you have to apply it and do something with it for it to mean anything. And those are both examples of guys who do that. And I learn from them all the time. I'm completely blown away by those guys all the time. So many of them who I've learned from.
And Rachel Kaiser, she talks about being the science.
Sure.
Hey, you come up with an idea and apply it. I just thought when she said that, it's like, yes, I just never put the piece together. I was like, yes, that is so true. Corey's got a great question. He says, any advice on dealing with imposter syndrome while training people with more experience or older than me? Hits me every time.
Yeah, just be humble. So if you're humble and you admit that you don't know everything, but you're just doing your best to share what you've learned, people will resonate with that. If you come across like you have all the answers and you are condescending, or you expect that you should have all the answers, then people are not going to respond to that. I mean, I started training guys in their 50s when I was 19. And they would at first come across, what does this kid have to teach me? And I'd be like, you know what? You're probably right. Like, you probably have so much more to teach me and I'd love to hear it. But here's this cool thing that I learned. So I'm going to share it with you. And if you can use it, you can use it. And if not, not. I'm not saying I've always done that. I'm sure there are times that I come across as cocky. I've actually had comments on videos like, that guy seems really condescending. It's like, when I do, I need to apologize and say that is not my intent. I'm sarcastic. In my head, that's not the same, but if I'm coming across that way, but humility is so key. Having imposter syndrome is healthy, because the reality is sometimes we are an imposter, right? That's okay. An imposter, if by that what you mean is that you don't have all the answers, well, that's true, because you do not. If by that you mean that you aren't qualified to be teaching someone, well, that's false, because we should all be teaching people all the time, right? That's a function of being human. And don't even think of it as teaching. Think of it as sharing. If you are a giving person, if you're kind with the things that you know, if you're empathetic towards another person and what they're struggling with, then you can say, you know what, I saw that once, and here's what I learned from that. And then you share it, and they're like, well, that's actually wrong. You're like, you know what? You're right. That is actually wrong. I mean, I just recently have had several things that I've been teaching wrong since the very beginning. And sometimes it's way wrong, and sometimes it's just a little wrong. But either way, going back and saying, yeah, you know what? You're right. That wasn't the right way to explain it. Now here's a better way. And that's all you have to do. And some people are going to hold that against you for a long time. Those people don't matter. I'm not saying they don't matter as humans, because of course they do. Everyone matters, but those opinions don't matter, because you're always going to have people who just want to hate, like that's going to be a thing. But make sure it's not because you're being an egotistical jerk. Because then you deserve to receive hate. If you're being condescending and rude, then that's, then people should push back on that. And surround yourself with people who can tell you the truth about yourself. That's another key thing. I've often thought about, and I've had this from the beginning, Jim Bergman, Neil Comparetto, Bill Spone. Ty is somebody who is, Ty's usually more on the nice side, but I have a lot of people who are willing to say, yo, dude, cut it out. Like, that's not how you want to be. Especially early on when I got on social media and started being a little, maybe a little too oversharey, maybe a little grouchy and crunchy at times. Neil pulled me aside and it's like, Chris Stevens has done it to me. Trying to think who else. Scary McCready has done it to me. There's another one that I'm forgetting, but it's happened a lot where people have been like, hey, was that really what you meant to say? And it's like, you know what? You're right. It wasn't how I meant to say it. And so that's the key thing. Just be humble.
It happens to me, especially if I'm hungry or tired. I try not to post at all, because I'll be hungry or tired. I'll say something, or I'll snap back at somebody taking it out of context, and then I read it later and go, oh man, I was being a jerk. Or when somebody comes up and says, hey, let's look at that. I mean, me and you, we've argued about things before. Sure. And I think that's healthy. That's good. Having that healthy discussion and arguing. But the key is to never take it personal. And so I think that's where we love what we do. We have passion for what we do, and sometimes it's just we take that into a personal level. And once we have friends that can remind us of that, or we can look at that later and think, okay, let's fix that, and let's move on and be healthier. Because I've changed just in the last year, in the last 10 years, of how I respond to people. I've changed. I love sarcasm, because to me it's just a form of humor, but I found that so many people don't understand sarcasm, and so I've now had to be a little more careful. I don't use sarcasm in text anymore, because they don't, it didn't come across, they think you're being serious or mean, and I'm like, that's not what I mean. That's not what I mean. So
sarcasm only works. It only works if people already know that you care about them, right? Like, and that's much easier to do when you're in proximity. I mean, if anyone who's been to the symposium, it's a giant sarcasm fest, and people are arguing all the time, but they're arguing about it's task conflict, not personal conflict. They're arguing about how to do things and how the math works and what works in real life, but everybody's just loving it. They're just enjoying each other. They're having a good time. They're ribbing each other, but it's because we all know we care about each other and we like each other, right? That's a big difference to being on social media, being like, you just need to go back to school. You're a friggin' idiot. Like, that stuff is not, there's just no place for that. It doesn't help anybody.
And the symposium is my favorite event of the year. I love it because there's so many just great, good, caring people, and we have great discussions, and we learn new things. I mean, there's some really cool places around, but the symposium has like a special magic to it. And when I've talked to people that's gone and didn't go, they've all agreed that same thing. It's like, there's just something special about it's just those good people coming together. It's absolutely awesome.
Yep. That's all it is. Just good people coming together.
That's right. So if you haven't got the book yet, I tell you, you got to get the book. If you want to talk to me about it, like, let's talk about it. Because I don't want to go over everything in the book. I don't want to take the magic out, but I've read this thing 1.5 times. First time I had to read it almost straight through, and I had to go through and I read the highlights and the sections, and take a pen and paper and note some of this stuff down. Whether you're an educator, whether you're teaching trades or not, I think there's so much great information in here. If you're a parent, a grandparent, there's so much great information. And then for you personally, there's so many things in there about how to move forward, getting your mindset right, caring, learning. It's a huge one that's in there. He has these steps out. This is something that I could have used a long time ago, but even right now, there were so many things in here. It was just like, wow, I needed that right now at this point. When you were talking about your first videos, looking back at them, and I'll share a video and I'll watch it, I cringe, and it's just like, man, everybody's doing these videos that are way better than mine. Maybe they shouldn't even be doing that. And when you wrote in there about, no, you got to work through that, you got to keep pushing forward, and I was like, yeah, definitely needed that. It was like you wrote that for me right now, like you knew what I was thinking. It's pretty awesome. So get the book. Definitely won't be disappointed. I promise you won't be disappointed. Here it is.
I
I'm
did
new
just
to
get
this
my
whole.
first. I did just get my first. Yeah, I got my first 2-star review. So somebody didn't like it out there, and that's okay. It certainly isn't for everybody. It's a short book. I made it short on purpose. That was one of the things I got pushback on from a few people. It's like, it's kind of short for a book. I'm like, yeah, I said what I wanted to say. And I already said a lot of different stuff. I don't like books that just keep harping on the same thing over and over and over. So I wanted to write a book that just said what I wanted to say, and I'm out. Others can comment, I'm not saying new stuff. I'm just putting together some things that, have been very meaningful to me, and I think will hold true 20 years from now. It's the type of book that I'm certain I'm going to read 20 years from now, and I'll cringe about some of the ways that I said things, but what I said, I know is going to hold true. There's a lot of people who I pay homage to, and it's worth just mentioning quickly that, as I mentioned early on, that this is not an original work in the sense that I came up with anything new here. You're going to see things in here that's like, I think I saw that in another book, or I think I heard some of that in a podcast. It's like, yeah, it's true. I mean, it all gets mixed up around in my head, and sometimes I don't know who to attribute for some of it. But yeah, feel free to call out, some of the sources on a few of the things as you find it. But yeah, it's a love letter to, I don't want to say a love letter. That's kind of intense, but it's a letter to everybody who's, committed their lives to the doing, and to the sharing, for others. And my grandpa being a really key one, but I mentioned my dad, and a lot of others as well. One of the things that a lot of people bring up, and it was in one of the comments, is about an audiobook. Obviously, an audiobook is coming. I have it mostly recorded at this point. The way Amazon works, you have to have the main book out first, and then the audiobook will come shortly thereafter. So you will all have the ability to get that. And some, asked for Nathan to read it, or Bill Russell. I think they would have both been great, but I just kept it easy, and I'm recording it myself. So if the voice is a little too squeaky for you, next time I'll have Bill Russell do the reading. So.
Well, I heard you reading it, and when I was reading it, it was your voice reading it, so it was already an audiobook for me.
Okay, right. That is funny how that happens, isn't it? Yeah.
And for people that know me, like, reading it, I don't just sit down and read a book. So I read very few books. It's usually I'm looking for a piece of information. I have a lot of books. I'm looking for a piece of information or that bigger understanding. So when I'm telling you guys that there's a book that I think's great, I'm telling you that for me, I mean, it was definitely great. And I don't read like a lot of books, and I thought this was absolutely awesome. As an educator, as somebody who cares about the younger generation, as somebody who wants to motivate people and help people get forward, this was it. I mean, there was, like I said, notes, pages in here. I truly believe this is a fantastic book. And Bryan, I thank you so much for all you do in our industry. Thank you for friendship and taking the time to talk with us today.
Yep, you are one of my favorite people, Ty. Thank you so much for considering doing this with me, and for all the support. Much appreciated. For everybody out there who's like, hey, Bryan's disappeared a lot. I haven't seen him much lately. Hey, it's busy season. I've got a lot of new things going on at Kalos, but I will be back doing more very, very soon. And I love y'all, care about y'all, and very much appreciate the opportunity to do this.
Absolutely awesome. Thanks, everybody, and have a great week, and never stop learning.